Hi, this is Tibor Lak. I am a retired aerospace engineer. I've worked on the space program for over 40 years. And I prepared a presentation on Noah's flood, Ice Age, the age of dinosaurs, and the division of the continents. I know you will like it because I am giving you evidence and proof of what happened from a biblical perspective that you will not find in the evolutionary material. Please listen to it. Your whole view of the Bible and Noah's flood will change forever. Thank you and enjoy it. My other favorite part, which is the Ice Age. I love this picture. This shows Greenland ice sheets. And it's interesting that scientists don't know, but they call it an ice age. I don't call it an ice age. I call it a lot of ice coming down in a very short period of time and burying things. It's not an age like as some of the scientists concluded, was like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, duration. But they don't know what caused all this ice to form on Greenland and the Arctic and Antarctica. So again, these are quotes that when they try to describe, I think this came from a NOVA program. They started describing it, and they said, the Earth's climate has been warm for hundreds of millions of years, okay? It began getting cooler, first slowly, then in a twinkling of an eye, huge ice sheets began to form, eventually reaching depths of over a mile. Twinkling of an eye, I like that, because that's what it was. It happened, boom, like this. And I like this admission. There's no real explanation of how this happened. There isn't. But the Bible, as you'll see, has the explanation for it, because it describes the scenario and the mechanism of how these ice sheets were formed. So this is a map of Greenland, and right here in the middle, I circled a location which they called Greenland Ice Sheet Project 2, GISP 2. And in this area, they drilled down to 10,000 feet. So, okay, I kind of jumped ahead of myself, but here they found like 10,000 feet depth of ice on Greenland. Similarly on the Antarctica. And what was amazing, what they found was at the bottom of this 10,000, now 10,000 feet, if you remember, if you're flying an airplane, that's when the captain says, it's not okay to turn on your electronic devices. That's 10,000 feet. So next time you're in an airplane, look down and say, okay, that's how much ice is there in the center of Greenland. But what's amazing is that at the bottom of this ice sheet, they found ice mixed with silty sand. So this particular one represents about looks like a 3 feet section with rings. Again, they noticed this, and they saw that this silt is superfine dirt with clay sand, and that they said that this sand, that silty sand, exists at the bottom of oceans and lakes. So how did it get there? They have no idea. They have admitted that they don't know. This is not your normal annual snowfall where you have snow and then silty ice mixing and then more stuff. It's not like that. They don't know. It's a mystery. How could more than 10 feet of ice silt end up in the middle of Greenland, hundreds of miles from the ocean? There's no scientific explanation for the source of the fine silt or mechanism of how it came. This is a confession, no explanation. So these next pictures represent different sections in this 10,000-foot ice core. This is the bottom, the brown, and the top. You see the rings there, because the rings are there as the snow and the sediment settled, it separated itself. So the scientists were excited about this because they interpreted this as being annual rings, that each ring represents a year of snow melt and thaw and things like that. So they spent literally millions of dollars counting the number of rings in this 10,000-foot ice core. And they counted 190,000 rings, and therefore they concluded that therefore this has to be 190,000 years old, because there's 190,000 layers there. But what they ignored was another piece of evidence that they also measured at the same time they drilled down to the bottom of the Greenland, is that they measured the temperature of this ice core. This is a picture, a plot of the temperature of the ice core from the top to the bottom. This is in meters, so multiplied by 3, that's 10,000 feet. So what's interesting about this is that this ice is super cold. It's not normal snow. Normal snow, when it gets to be like minus 18 degrees Celsius, there is no snow because there's no humidity in the atmosphere. This ice was generated in a completely different way. And it shows that all this came down at once. It came down suddenly. And that over time, the heating from below, from the geothermal heat coming back through the crust of the Earth, is warming up the ice sheet. And so that's why it's warmer at the bottom than it is at the top. It's warming here. It's warm. It hasn't been there long enough for all of it to be warmed up, but it's on the way. So this, to understand how the ice sheet was formed, whether there's an ice age or not, this piece of evidence is really key. But it's not being interpreted, not being used, because they have no explanation. The scientific community has no explanation of how super cold ice could be formed, plus how super cold ice with sand mixed in it, how it would be formed, how it could be available. So, and then this is just a picture that if the ice is colder than minus 17.8 degrees, there is no snow. Basically, the data shows that this could not have accumulated over tens of thousands of years with embedded silk. So the counting of the rings is irrelevant. You can't, again, I go back to the scientific approach when I said that a scientific approach is one that uses all the evidence, not just some of it. You can't ignore this. This is shouting at you that says, look, tell me how this was formed. But they ignore it. You probably won't hear anything about this in a discussion about the Ice Age. They have the data, they don't know what to do with it. So, me being an analyst, I love to analyze things. And so this is a picture of the ice sheet being heated from below, from geothermal heating. And fortunately, you can analyze this because you don't have to worry about what's happening on the surface. Because the top 100 meters of this ice is still the same as cold as it is in the middle. So whatever solar activity is over the thousands of years or millions of years has no effect on it because it hasn't penetrated down. It's all being heated from the bottom. And that made it nice. Because if it's being heated from the bottom, then you can put a conduction model together and see what happens. So before I show you that result, I wanted to show you that the Greenland ice sheet and the ice sheet in Antarctica are about the same depth. You have, in the Greenland ice sheet, you have 3,050 meters depth. In the Antarctica, in this particular location, was 2,800 meters deep. So what that tells me is that why are they the same? They are the same because the duration of this ice deposit at Greenland and Antarctica was the same. This event was the same event. Had it been a lot different, then you couldn't make that connection. But because they're about the same, you can say that this phenomenon happened in a period of time on Greenland and on the other side of the world in Antarctica. So there's not going to be a test on this, but for those who are interested, this is the conduction model. And I've written many of those, and you could actually, if you were a college student or high school student, you could do this. These equations are not that complicated. So what you have is heat coming into the bottom. It gets warmed up. Some of the heat gets conducted up. No. Okay. So this is the basic model. And the model that I had 40 nodes, and I changed it to see if the answers would come out differently. It didn't. So here it is, the ice core temperature data from Greenland. And if I could have a drum roll right now. Thank you. So this is what the analysis showed, that if you start this process 2,400 years ago, the blue line is where you would expect this ice core temperature to look like. It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, not only the magnitude here is the same, but the slope of the curve is the same. Now, there are inaccuracies here. I admit it. It's not like right on, no error. But there's also unknown, because what I did was I just looked at the geothermal heating from the bottom, which we know how much heat comes through the Earth. But there's also other heat that I didn't include, which represents the heat stored in the crust and the ground below. So that also adds to the heat. So that's why I came up with a 40% higher heat flux going into the ice core than the actual steady state heat conduction from the Earth. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you liked that. So what about 10,000 years? Because that's being thrown around as, the last ice age was 10,000 years ago. So this is the curve that shows that if this process started 10,000 years ago, then the black line is where the temperature should be. It would be much warmer. It still would be there, but it would be much warmer. So I just want to reassure you that the Greenland ice sheet is going to be around for thousands of more years left. It's not going away. And so even if it did all melted, the amount of ice on Greenland would only raise the sea level by about 25 feet or so. But anyway, there's a lot of energy or cold energy stored in the ice that will take time before it gets reheated. I did this thing, and I suggest, again, if you're a high school student or a college student, if you've taken Physics 101 or whatever, you can do a back-of-the-envelope calculation. You don't have to do a conduction model. You can just do an analysis. If I had a chunk of ice and I was heating it at a certain rate, how long would it take for all that ice to go from a super cold state to the melting point? And that's what I did. These equations are here, assumptions and everything else. But the answer is, for the ice core, for this depth, 10,000 feet, and the initial temperature of minus 31 degrees Celsius, it would take over 46,000 years for all that ice to melt as a steady state. So the idea of this ice being there for 190,000 years, it really contradicts analysis. And this is something that's missing, again, is missing from the scientific community. They do not check their answers. This is I call it a back of the envelope check, because there's only a few equations that you have to deal with. So how was the ice sheet formed? Well, as I mentioned to you that the Bible says that the fountains of the great deep broke open and it ejected this water into the atmosphere. And I think it even ejected debris that impacted the moon, as we saw on the craters on one side of the moon is different than the other one. So we're looking at a cataclysm that we have no comparison to. There's nothing like a volcanic eruption. It doesn't come anywhere close to this. But this particular chart shows that if you eject water into the upper atmosphere, if you have ejected to 190,000 feet elevation, you'll produce minus 32 degrees Celsius, which is what is the temperature in Greenland. If you eject it to 240,000 feet, then you get the temperature that you see on Antarctica. Okay. I don't know if I should, maybe if you don't mind, I'll just take a second. I worked on the Space Shuttle program. We had an issue where we had hundreds of pounds of liquid hydrogen trapped in the feed line and 3,000 pounds of oxygen trapped in the feed line. And there was an issue about how do we get rid of this if the shuttle has to have an abort and come back and land on the landing site with all this hydrogen still trapped in the feed line. It represented a bomb because hydrogen would leak into the F compartment. There's oxygen around, and it's a ticking time bomb. So it was a kind of a showstopper. We didn't know what to do. But fortunately, we would only have to worry about that in case there was an abort. So I wrote a program, and I showed that if you eject this liquid hydrogen or liquid oxygen in space at a very high altitude, much higher than this, you will freeze the liquid hydrogen and oxygen into fine droplets fine crystals of ice. And we demonstrated that on STS-51 when Senator Gore, the first senator to fly, I think was the last senator too, who flew on the shuttle. They did the demo worked fine, and they reported back to us that what they saw was that the entire space shuttle on orbit was covered with ice. They saw ice crystals on the windshield of the orbiter. It was that fine. Boom, it generated. So this analysis is really founded, well, it's on the physics of the properties of water, but also verified through testing flight demo. So I told you I selected 10,000 atmosphere for the interior compartment of the underground cavity, because in order to get to that altitude, 190,000 feet or 240,000 feet, you need somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 to 7,000 atmosphere to eject it. And this is a simple calculation. This is the same equation that if you throw up a rock, depending on the velocity, it'll go to a certain altitude and come back down. This is the same thing. You convert the pressure inside the underground and convert it into dynamic pressure and velocity, and you can calculate how far it would go. So that's why I chose 10,000 feet, because I wanted to cover myself, besides the properties were available here. So we're going to talk about some other findings. Oops, I'm going to have to go faster here. Okay, I'm going to skip if you don't mind. What's interesting, what's coming out now, is that they're discovering that animals they're found in permafrost. That what is permafrost? Permafrost, this is permafrost. It's a mixture of sand and fine ice. And again, the scientists don't have an explanation of how this is formed. This is not your annual rainfall. This is a mixture. Again, it makes sense, and it's easy to see that if you have this water and mud and things ejected in the atmosphere, it gets mixed up, comes back down. But what's even, well, here's another picture. Some of the permafrost is not thin. It can be up as much as 3,000 feet deep. What they find in this permafrost are fossils of mammoth, and now they're finding fossils of dinosaurs, in the Arctic region. And they're not supposed to be, dinosaurs should not be living in the Arctic region. So they're finding thousands of them. There's so many mammals that they found that it actually became an industry to harvest the ivory. I read somewhere that they said something like 90% of all the ivory that we have around came from mammoth tusk. It's not from African elephant tusk, but from mammoth tusk. They're finding bones of prehistoric animals that are there. And there's no explanation for that, because if these animals died naturally, then they would be consumed by the predators. But they see a sudden change in the climate. This was not a gradual event, it was sudden. If it was a gradual event, then the animals would just migrate to a warmer spot and be safe. But because it was a sudden event, they couldn't. Okay. Now some of the pictures, I'll go through these fast. These are fun. This is a steppe bison found in Alaska, and you can see he's completely buried in this permafrost. They're digging him out, or her. And then these are cave bears brought from the permafrost. This is the head of the Ice Age wolf. Here's a picture of a woolly rhino. Here's a picture of a colt found in the permafrost in Siberia. I like this one because this one shows the mammoth encased in this ice. It's completely, So this guy, this Beresovka mammoth in Siberia, it's got a lot of fame. He was found in the early 18th century or so, and they found that he was buried in the permafrost. But what was interesting is that the permafrost was similar to what they found at the bottom of the Greenland ice sheet. So it kind of implies that the process was the same. But it had remains of his stomach were intact, and there were grasses and buttercups lodged between its teeth. So again, this poor soul, this poor mammoth, as he was munching on the buttercups, he got suddenly buried in permafrost and died. Flesh was still edible. Here's a picture of a woolly mammoth. I'm just going to go faster here about her. And so apparently they admit this was a BBC News article that they said that the last mammoth died out about 2000 BC. Well, again, it's kind of supports the theory of the biblical flood. They found dinosaurs in the Arctic, encased in ice block. Paleontologists working on the top of a frozen Antarctic mountain have extracted a rock and ice fossil popsicles encasing the remains of a massive, previously unknown dinosaur. They estimated that he was about 190 million years old, but lived in a much warmer climate than exists. Yeah, it had to be. So the question is, how could a dinosaur that lived in a tropical environment 190 million years ago be buried and frozen in ice, not under ice, but in ice, when the ice age was supposed to be more recent? Here's some recent discovery. This came out like 2008. They've discovered these dinosaurs in permafrost in Alaska, different species. So again, hundreds of fossils locked in permafrost, at least 70 million years old. And interestingly, discovery that they lived and thrived in the Arctic has taken everyone by surprise. Yes. It challenges everything we think we know about dinosaurs. Yes. So, okay, I think this is a summary chart. Okay, I think I covered this. Okay, I'm just going to go to the next one, because the next one is going to be interesting about the continental separation, and I'll only take about 10 minutes on that.